Welcome in, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
This is Everything Sucks, Let's Fix It, episode 29. My name is Ben Mayer.
My name is Anthony Buono.
Today is January 4th, 2024. We're in a new year, an election year.
Big, exciting stuff is going to be going on this channel, baby.
Yeah, it's about to get crazy. And to start that off, what better to talk about than updates to court cases that are determining whether or not Donald Trump can be the president of the United States.
First, before we go into anything, how do you feel about all of this arguments over the 14th Amendment? Like how initially, are you shocked that we're even talking about it still, that it hasn't been solved for yet?
I can't say that. I feel like I'm too deep in this now to even be there. We first brought this up months ago, as far as the conversation, the discussion point of whether Trump was eligible to run or not. So now I'm so deep that I'm just trying to figure out what is true and what isn't. Is he eligible?
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure it out for myself before even anyone else does.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's do it.
So the context here, this happened right after we recorded our last episode, which has now been a while because we had the holiday break. But in Colorado, the state Supreme Court ruled 4-3 that Trump committed insurrection and that the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment meant that he was not eligible to be on the ballot and that he wouldn't be in the Republican primary. This came off the back of the appeals court asserting that Trump had committed insurrection, but that Section 3 didn't apply to him because of nuances in the wording. We talked about this on a previous episode. Basically, they decided that the 14th Amendment applied to everyone but the president, which is insane.
Because for some weird reason, the 14th Amendment does not specifically outline the president, but does specifically outline other offices to the Constitution. But
yeah.
Because the president wasn't explicitly listed, they were like, okay, he committed insurrection, but the whole insurrection clause doesn't apply to the presidency.
It's funny. I got, again, getting so deep into this, I read a New York Times article that actually, an opinion piece that made a pretty convincing argument that the 14th Amendment, that Section 3 wasn't supposed to apply to the presidents.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I was starting to be like, this is crazy. But then there was a piece put out by the Congressional Research Office that noted that cited a research paper that was going over the history of writing that amendment, and they found that, or the research paper cited a conversation that happened in Congress where someone specifically asked, why is the president not included here? And the person responded basically, that's irrelevant. It would never matter. So clearly the problem isn't that the president was specifically supposed to be excluded. They just thought it would never really amount to anything because after the Civil War, they weren't really considering another insurrection happening and someone who committed that insurrection even being considered for president.
They weren't even thinking that the country would be dumb enough to elect an insurrectionist as the president.
Exactly.
And we know that because I guess we have conversations on the congressional floor saying the American people aren't that stupid.
Exactly.
No one's going to do that. Well, here we are.
We fucking are. Yeah. So both the voters who want to keep Trump off the ballot, the Colorado Republican Party, and as of a few days ago, or I think maybe yesterday, Trump himself have all asked the Supreme Court to take up the case. So we've built the momentum. This kind of has to happen now.
And I want to make it clear, the guys who brought this case were a group of independents and Republicans. It wasn't even Democrats that brought the case into Colorado.
Yeah.
This wasn't a partisan thing. It was literally independents and Republicans that brought this to the Colorado appeals court or whatever and try to get Trump off the ballot. It wasn't Democrats.
Exactly. So unfortunately now we're at a point where timelines are extremely tight. They've requested that the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, decides whether to take the case by this Friday, which is tomorrow, and rule by February 11th because Colorado's primary is on Super Tuesday, which is March 5th. So hopefully they take it. If they decline to take the case, then Trump will be excluded from Colorado's primary ballot. Then off the back of this, in Maine, the Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows, who is a Democrat, ruled that Trump was ineligible as per the 14th Amendment. She said, I am mindful that no Secretary of State has ever deprived a presidential candidate of ballot access based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. I am also mindful, however, that no presidential candidate has ever before engaged in insurrection. Badass.
Yeah, kind of a badass. And it makes it so much easier for her to say this because now we have courts on the record saying Trump committed insurrection.
Yes.
We have appeals courts across the country. We have one of the state Supreme Courts saying that, yes, Donald Trump committed insurrection. That makes these Secretary of States who do this have some legs to it.
Yes, they do. It's interesting that it gets into the procedural element of creating ballots, right? Because it means that secretaries of state, it's not clear because we're in such new legal territory of like what the standard for committing insurrection or inciting insurrection is.
Yeah.
So these secretaries of state, when they think about making their ballots, it's kind of on them to decide whether or not they think Trump is eligible. And Bellows was the first one who made that decision that she couldn't, or that Trump couldn't be on it. In other states like California, Trump was put on the ballot, but that's because there are specific differences in the state laws that give powers to the Secretary of State to exclude anyone who is ineligible from the ballot. California doesn't have that law. Yep. Michigan also doesn't have that law. So they're not keeping Trump off their ballot either.
Are they taking anything to the state Supreme Court in Michigan? Do we know?
I think there was a case there a case that was dismissed at one point. I think the Supreme Court dismissed a case, and all they said is, we are not persuaded that the questions presented should be reviewed by this court. One justice wrote a dissent, which basically explained this point, that while Colorado law makes it clear that political parties can only put forward qualified candidates, Michigan law does not make that distinction.
Gotcha. But then let's get into discussing this here, because I think it's who decides who's qualified. It's a really, really hard question because the 14th Amendment has no enforcement mechanism written into it. So it's really hard to make the determination, who is it? Does someone have to be like criminally charged with insurrection and proven without a reasonable doubt? Or is it something that can just be done through a court order and a judge determines you broke the 14th Amendment?
There is some precedent that says that inciting insurrection gets you kicked off, and that it doesn't have to be a conviction. That there have been moments in cases before, or I think when the amendment was first relevant after the Civil War, where people didn't have to be charged by the law with insurrection, and yet they were still barred from running for office.
Right.
So I don't think he needs to be criminally convicted for it to apply.
Yeah. There's an interesting argument that I've heard. I think there was actually one of the opinions, or maybe it was in the dissent of the Colorado Supreme Court case, where the author of the dissent said that we don't have the authority to do this, that we don't have the authority to declare that he is
ineligible.
Ineligible. And he cited, because look, this is more complicated than the simple demographic requirement to run for president. It's not something as simple as, oh, he's over the age of 35. Oh, he was born in the United States.
Yeah.
Oh, he didn't commit insurrection. Insurrection is more of a difficult, non-objective word.
Yeah.
No matter how much we think it might be, obviously, insurrection, which I do, it still leads to that question, who is making that determination?
Yeah.
And it sucks that we don't have a direct enforcement mechanism, but I think this is the way the process is supposed to work. I think it's supposed to work its way through the courts, and I think it is supposed to go to the Supreme Court. And if not the Supreme Court, who else makes this decision? I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. Like the whole point of the court system is supposed to be to interpret not only the law, but the cases that they're given in the context of the law, right? So I think that's a really weak dissent from the Colorado Supreme Court, because if not you to decide that this was insurrection, then who? Yeah.
I guess he's saying the criminal courts, but...
Yeah, so they're saying you need a whole different case, right, to figure this out.
But you don't need a whole criminal case to prove that he's 35.
No.
Right? So that's where the arguments were kind of boiling down to in Colorado.
Yeah.
Now, do you think the Supreme Court will take it up? Or do you think they'll just move on?
God, I think they can't want to.
No, God, they must... John Roberts must be just shitting himself right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this kind of wraps up. I put two questions here. Will the Supreme Court take it up, and is keeping Trump off the ballot actually worse for democracy? I think they're really tied together. I think the Supreme Court won't want to take it up, because if they have to rule that Trump committed insurrection and keep him off the ballot, it's not only the faith lost in our electoral systems, but also in the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Both of which have already been eroded. And the Supreme Court, which has been teetering on the brink with these ethical violations that they've been committing. So I think they don't want to, but I also think Colorado won't be the last instance that tries to get it to the court.
Oh yeah, no way.
And it doesn't. It's almost too important for them to decline.
Right.
Right. So I think they will. I hope they will.
Yeah, I think they will too, but I think they'll rule in Trump's favor, dude. I don't think they'll rule against. I don't think they will rule. Like, I think John Roberts will vote with the Liberals, and then the only other swing votes are Amy Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh, I believe. I don't think Gorsuch would switch. I know Alito and Clarence Thomas wouldn't.
You don't think Coney Barrett might?
No, Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh are the two that may.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying Gorsuch, Alito, Clarence Thomas are the ones I'm convinced wouldn't.
Okay. See, based on what I read, I think that it's actually pretty clear that Trump incited insurrection.
Yeah, I think I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any argument for it. I mean, like, you could go down and make the argument. I'm sure you're going to have plenty of those arguments in the comment section of this video. But
yeah,
I don't know. We don't have the time to run through all of it, but maybe we should one day. Maybe we should just dedicate an episode deep dive into why he did an insurrection. Okay.
I mean, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. They've run through so much evidence in multiple instances. But I will just say I think he did. And I think the only other point you can go off is the point that the Colorado Appeals Court made, that the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to the president.
Yeah.
And I think the historical context that I just gave makes it pretty hard to argue that it's not supposed to apply to the president.
Yeah, I mean, and the job of the courts is to figure out what the intent of every law was.
Exactly.
So if we have pretty clear evidence that the intent was, obviously this would cover the president, as long as the American people, we just don't think the American people would be that dumb.
Yeah.
Well, then there you go.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Trump is obviously appealing this decision, as we talked about. And his main thing that he's going off against, he's actually citing a really, really funny defense here. Mm-hmm. I can't even believe it's true. He's saying that this isn't just applying to all the stuff that's going on with him being on the ballot. This applies to all of his criminal cases too. Mm-hmm. Trump is saying, and he's claiming, that he is totally immune from all prosecutions for the actions that he took while he was in office. He's immune to all of it. Mm-hmm. That's what he's suggesting. This is going to a federal appeals court sometime next week, but it's so crazy because he's saying that the only mode of punishment while you are the president is impeachment and conviction by the Senate. And all of those actions can only be punished with those things. So since he got through his time in office without an impeachment and without a conviction, now he's totally clean from anything that was done while he was president.
I read into this. I had a different understanding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So my understanding is there's a law about impeachment that says whatever you get impeached for, like if you are acquitted in impeachment, it does not mean you are acquitted from your criminal trials. Mm-hmm. It means that you can still be convicted in your criminal trials. The crazy argument that his legal team is trying to make is that if you sorry, I messed that up. If you are convicted in impeachment, then it does not mean that you are convicted in your criminal trials.
Yes.
So Trump is trying to make the argument that if you are acquitted in impeachment, then you also are necessarily acquitted in your criminal trials.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the other side. He's making both arguments. He's doing both of them.
Okay.
So he's saying, because I was impeached and not convicted by the Senate for the January 6th stuff, you have to throw that case out.
Yeah.
Because I've already you can't double jeopardy me.
Yeah.
You can't convict me or try me for the same thing twice, which is so funny to think about. Like, I want to go back to my first one, right? Mm-hmm. What do you mean you can't be charged by things that you were doing while you were president? Why did Ford pardon Nixon in the 70s?
Exactly.
If that was the case, what did Nixon have to worry about that he needed to be pardoned for? Mm-hmm. If it was done what's going on? Why?
Yeah.
Right? That makes zero sense.
Also, I saw a funny tweet.
Obviously, what a dangerous idea.
Yeah, what a dangerous precedent. I saw a funny tweet that, what if Biden just said, you know what, Trump, You're completely right.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be in office forever. Yeah. I'm never leaving, and there's nothing you can do to get rid of me.
What would you do in response if this is your line of thinking?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, he would obviously say this is tyranny. Yeah. But
right, when he does it, it isn't tyranny. It's freedom when he does it.
Exactly.
Right? Because it's freedom for him.
Yeah.
Oh God, it's just insane, and
it is wild.
It builds off of what McConnell was saying when Mitch McConnell voted not to convict Trump in the Senate impeachment hearing after January 6th. He literally said that he wanted the justice system to take it up, and that this wasn't the place. He's like, this is the justice system's job, and it's like, oh my God, Trump has so lost the plot that I think this is such an out of brain idea that it's obviously going to go nowhere. I mean, like, this would just cause an absolute, like, this would literally make the president the king.
Yeah. It can't go anywhere. Again, we're talking about fears for our democracy. This would destroy it in a different way.
Yeah.
So that won't happen.
All right. Now on to election news. We have Iowa. It is in 11 days. God, it's crazy because the Iowa caucus is like a holiday for me. I'm the biggest election junkie you have. I put on my favorite candidate shirt. I sit down with some beer and I watch it on like as many monitors as I can scrounge up. I'll ask all my roommates for all their laptops. I'll have like 5 things in front of me watching everything, you know? And now I really don't care about the Iowa caucus because it's so obvious.
Huge letdown.
It is a huge. I only get so many of these in my life, and this one is so boring that I'm just so disappointed by it.
Yeah.
But I want to go a little bit into Trump's strategy and how he's going to win the Iowa caucus, or at least how I think he's going to win. He's going to win. But it's really, really interesting because he had a lot of trouble in Iowa back in 2016. This is one of the states where he lost to Ted Cruz. He lost to Ted Cruz by like 5 points or so. And this is even when Trump was leading in the Iowa polls by 5 points over Ted Cruz. And I think that's a really interesting thing. So this is like one of the only early states that might not go for Trump. Trump did pretty okay in New Hampshire and did great in all the other states, but Iowa was his struggling point. So after he lost in 2016, he decided that he needed to change strategies. But I also want to go into his loss in 2016 for a brief second here and talk about the psyche of this man. Right after the Iowa caucus of 2016, he said that Ted Cruz stole it. He said that Ted Cruz cheated. He said that Ted Cruz sent out faulty mailers saying that Ben Carson had dropped out of the race and That part was even before the Iowa caucus. So he was accusing his opponents of cheating before the Iowa caucus happened. And then after he lost, he said that the results were phony and that it was stolen by the Republican Party because the Republican Party didn't want him to win. So he's been doing this since day one, guys. This is nothing new for him. He's been trying to say that elections have been stolen from him forever. So
I feel like I've never seen a person who hates losing so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never seen someone who's so small. That's how I look at it. He's so small that he cannot accept defeat, you know? But he is changing his strategy in this Iowa 2020. He is doing a lot to make sure he wins this state. And the way he's doing it is extremely smart and actually shows to how well his 2024 presidential campaign might be run. He has amassed a massive voter database in Iowa over these last 8 years. He has an in-depth machine that has identified all of the people who voted for him in 2016 and 2020 who did not caucus for him in 2016 and are sending them a barrage of text messages to remind them to vote.
Such a crazy undertaking.
I know.
An enormous effort.
And I think it's a brilliant idea.
You do?
Yeah, if you can actually slice down and find the exact voters who didn't vote for you this time but voted for you then, and you can send them just targeted ads, targeted mail, targeted texts. Yes. I think that works.
I absolutely think it works too. The question is the cost. And the only reason that it wouldn't be worth it is if you're already almost certainly going to win Iowa by at least 10 points.
Right.
That's
So like, is he just wasting his money on something he's going to win by 10 points anyway?
Yeah.
Like, that's a good point.
But that's why I think it's kind of an ego thing. Like, to me, it rings that the Cruz loss, right, in 16 is resonating with him, and he wants to be absolutely certain that doesn't happen.
It did something to him. That loss did something.
Yeah.
Like, he knows deep down he lost. But he's also, with this strategy, he's actually saving some money as a traditional campaign because he's not doing door knocking pretty much at all. He's avoiding door knocking entirely. He's just not doing it. But because he has such this in-depth voter reach capability that not DeSantis, not Nikki Haley has, he thinks that'll overdo it. He has accumulated. What's up?
Do we know how he has that information?
I don't. I have no idea how campaigns get all that information.
That's a ton of data.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Sorry. I know, right? Isn't that so interesting? Yeah. I would love to be a part of that operation. Dude. That would be crazy. So Trump, to see his momentum, he has accumulated 1,800 caucus captains. To put this in perspective, there's only 1,600 caucus locations. He has more captains than there are locations in Iowa.
That's insane.
And also, each one of these captains get a golden tinted Make America Great Again hat that they're going to wear on the caucus floor, which is so cheesy, dude. It's so cheesy. But again, this strategy is genius. Each of these captains was given a list of 25 people who live in their town who are possible Trump caucusers but have never caucused before.
Wow.
And the captain's job is to get 10 of those 25 to get to the caucus location.
Wow.
That is genius.
Yeah.
That you can literally say, these are your 25 neighbors who did not vote for me. Go get them.
As someone who works in advertising, that is exactly what you would want.
Yeah.
The ROI on that strategy would be so high.
No, it's absolutely insane. It really is. Kristi Noem, she is the governor of South Dakota. She is a possible Trump pick for vice president. She's on her way to Iowa to campaign for Trump, as well as Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene coming to my town would obviously do nothing for me, but apparently the guys in Iowa like that. So that is what it is.
Yeah.
Now, DeSantis and Haley just don't have this data. They don't have the capability to run this type of campaign. And they are running expensive and intricate door-knocking campaigns that are less precise but have more of a human connection. And I'm curious to see which one is more effective. If from my perspective, if Trump underperforms the polls, I think that is a positive for door-knocking. And then if he exceeds the polls, it's a negative for door knocking, positive for this targeted ad stuff.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It's kind of like, is awareness the main problem that you have to solve, or is consideration and understanding of the person's platform?
Yeah.
Which is the more important thing to get at this stage of a primary, right?
Mm-hmm. But I also have to say, Trump's strategy of the caucus captains might be able to get that human connection that door knocking has. Because if one of your neighbors is coming up and really making it a point to reach out to you, I feel like that's more effective than anything Nikki Haley or DeSantis could ever do.
True. I mean, that's kind of what I thought about when you said 1,800 caucus captains. It's almost like if you had one person in every friend group in the constituency that you were targeting, to talk to their friends about you as a candidate. That is the best possible scenario.
Yep. That was the whole strategy behind Bernie's 2020 presidential campaign. He had this thing called the Burn app, and you would download the Burn app on your phone, and you would log the number of friends you talked to every day about Bernie. And you would log the conversations you had with them, what policies you talked about, what were they most excited about, and then you would log how many friends you had. And then on election days, it would send you push notifications to make sure all your friends voted, and it would have check marks next to all your friends, so you could check off if they voted or not.
That's wild.
Yeah, that Bernie Sanders presidential campaign was very, very intense with that young voter outreach. It didn't work.
It's crazy that it didn't work. Did it only not work because the rest of the Democrats rallied around Biden at the last second? Because I've heard that account before.
So I think it's a mixture of both.
Okay.
I think if Bernie were to have, if Elizabeth Warren were to have dropped out and endorsed Bernie
instead of Biden,
she didn't drop out at all.
Oh,
she stayed in for Super Tuesday, which split the progressive vote a lot. Right. I think the Democratic primary would have been a lot closer if Elizabeth Warren had dropped out with the rest of the moderates. I don't blame the moderates for dropping out. I don't think it was a grand conspiracy or anything like that. It definitely wasn't. It's the obvious move. I mean, if you're Pete Buttigieg, you'd rather be in a Biden administration than a Sanders administration.
Okay.
If you're Amy Klobuchar, you'd want a Biden presidency over a Bernie presidency.
Okay.
And the same way I would have wanted Elizabeth Warren to drop out and endorse Bernie, the Biden people would have felt the same way.
Sure.
But it was just a really interesting campaign season. I think it would have been a lot closer, maybe 60-40 instead of the 70-30 that it turned out to be.
Okay. But still Biden would have won.
Yeah. Still Biden would have won. I just don't think the American people were ready for a Bernie Sanders presidency yet at the end of the day. I just don't think they were. I think they will be one day, and that's my belief.
Sure.
Obviously a different man, not Bernie, but somebody like him.
Yeah.
And I think eventually. An AOC, maybe.
Yeah.
She's just a hard... you know what it is? She is such a known quantity already.
Sure.
And Bernie Sanders had such an amazing political moment in 2016 because he was not a known quantity. He was the independent from Vermont that nobody really knew. But once he started talking, you're like, oh wait, I like everything this guy's saying. And then he was like a pretty normal, good dude. And he hadn't been attacked and berated by the media. But AOC has already been attacked and berated by the media.
True.
And so much in politics is about having a fresh face. That's why Obama was so popular in 2008, was because he was only a senator for 2 years. He was only a state senator for a couple years before that. I mean, his turnaround from doing Obama's turnaround from doing the keynote speech in 2004 for John Kerry's nomination at the DNC, and then to 2008 becoming president, is an extremely fast turnaround.
Yeah.
And because he didn't have all those years of getting berated was why he was popular. I think the same thing with Bernie.
Okay.
Now I feel like the next progressive icon is someone that we don't know yet.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, like the next presidential progressive that's going to run is somebody that we don't know or even think about yet, because it's someone who can sell himself as a new fresh face and avoid all the partisan attacks that have been going on forever.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Back to the Republican primary of today, and not rehashing the biggest heartbreak of my life from 4 years ago. Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley is gaining a lot of ground. And because of that, I think it's only fair that we give her a true shake under the limelight.
Yeah.
She is doing really well in New Hampshire. She's doing really well in Iowa. She has overtaken DeSantis as the number 2 nationally. She's really become the top dog here. And it says a lot. What?
Well, not the top dog.
Okay, not the top dog, but Trump is obviously like,
the next top dog.
Yeah, Trump is like the sun compared to Nikki Haley, who's like a blade of grass, okay? And then Ron DeSantis is like the soil.
Yeah.
So here we go. Nikki Haley, she had an interesting week. She was in a campaign event at New Hampshire, and she made some interesting remarks about the Civil War. She was asked at a New Hampshire speech what caused the Civil War. And I think this should be a litmus test for every single politician. I think every time you see a politician, you should ask them flat out, what caused the Civil War? Every time. Because this will tell you exactly, this will tell you a lot about somebody. Okay? So she says, it was about the freedoms of what people could and couldn't do. And then the person responded and said, I noticed you didn't use the word slavery. And she was like, well, what do you want me to say about slavery? Well, first of all, I would like you to say that slavery was bad. That would be first. Like, out of all the things you could say about slavery, I would prefer if you could say it was bad. Right?
Agreed.
Yeah. Obviously, okay, so that's first thing. Secondly, the freedoms of what people and couldn't do. To do what? To own people? That the freedoms that we're talking about? The freedoms of what people could and couldn't do? Or are we talking about the freedoms to own people? What freedoms are we talking about?
Did you watch the video of her response?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I did not. Because I'm assuming, like, you're saying she jokingly told the questioner he had posed a tough one.
Yes.
And then she's like, I'm imagining her being like, the freedoms of what people could and couldn't do. Like, that sounds like it'll play.
Dude, it was worse than that.
Really?
She went on for a minute and a half without saying slavery.
Damn.
This was only a segment of... Dude, her response... You need to go watch the video, guys. She literally talks for like a full minute about the things, about freedom, about different ideologies in government, avoiding the word slavery. When it's obvious that the thing was about slavery, people.
Yeah.
Okay? But what makes this important is because she comes from South Carolina. Well, what's South Carolina? South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union for the Civil War. So she comes from a state that has a history that does not look down on the Confederacy as much as the northern states do, specifically New Hampshire, which is as like, I don't want to say Yankee, but is as northern as you could get. I mean, that's like New England, so it's just interesting. And the first sentence in the South Carolina Declaration of Secession is as followed. An increasing hostility on the part of the non-slaveholding states to the institution of slavery has led to a disregard of their obligations, and the laws of the general government has ceased to affect the objects of the Constitution. So they literally say in the first sentence of their Declaration of Secession that
it's because of slavery.
It's because of slavery. And to be even more specific, one of the main reasons was because of the Northern's rejection of abiding by the fugitive slave law. A lot of Northern states were not abiding by the fugitive slave law. For anyone who doesn't know, the fugitive slave law was if a slave escaped from the South to the North, the Northern states had an obligation to capture that slave and send them back to their master's ranch, plantation in the South. A lot of Northern states just weren't abiding by it. They're like, we're not doing it. I think Vermont was one of the most famous ones. New Hampshire was on that list too. So it's so obvious that this is what caused the Civil War. It's historical revisionism to suggest otherwise. And this isn't the first time Nikki Haley has said something like this. There was a time when she was running for governor. I believe back in 2010 she ran for governor or something like that. Maybe 2014, something like, no, it was 2010. She was elected governor in 2010. And to get the endorsement of one of the Republican groups down there, she basically did the same waffling. She gave pretty much the same answer. Oh, freedom, different ideologies, again, avoiding the question.
Yeah.
But then this leads into something else. Why would she say this? Nikki Haley is not a white nationalist. She's not a racist. She actually has a great favorable opinions towards immigrants. She actually has a great opinion towards illegal immigrants. She said that we should welcome them with love and all that. And so she's not like that. Why is she doing this? It's because she's scared. It's because she's scared of the base of the Republican Party. That the truth is there is no room in the Republican Party for moderates anymore. If she were to come out and say that it was all about slavery, she would have been hit on right-wing media about how she's woke, about how she's giving in to the cultural Marxist agenda to redefine America. That's what she's afraid of. And she knows that she needs some of the Trump base. And the truth is, a lot of the Trump base doesn't think the Civil War was about slavery. And that's or they don't think about the Civil War at all, and they're just told that it's not about slavery.
Yeah, or they hear that the Civil War is about slavery and they personalize the attack. They identify with it, right? Like they know already, they have the context that they're in the quote unquote basket of deplorables. And so they want, it helps when they hear the issue skirted around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It helps them because they also talk about all the time in schools about how they feel like white people are getting attacked in the building up of our history, of our national story. And they're like, the Confederacy wasn't about slavery. It was about something totally different. Don't attack all white people like that. It's not our fault. That's what it is. And that's what it boils down to.
So I love the comparison of like the arguments that people make when they don't want statues of Confederacy officials to be taken down. This is totally connected to that.
Exactly connected.
Yeah.
Listen, briefly about Confederate statues, it's like Nazi paraphernalia in my mind.
Exactly.
It's the same thing as having a statue of Hitler.
It's crazy.
Right? If you're having a statue of Jefferson Davis, you might as well be flying the flag of the Third Reich. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. That is just what it is. And when the Nazis were defeated in Germany, they didn't preserve their statues. They smashed all of them.
Yeah.
They made it a point to make it a public spectacle to smash all of them.
Yes.
And that's how I view it. I view the Confederacy and the Southern secession and their fight to own other people is just as deplorable as the Nazi fight.
Absolutely.
And that's how we have to look at it.
Yeah.
So after this, she went on an apology tour. She was like, oh, of course it was about slavery, as she has her new husband, Chris Sununu, sitting next to her. Chris Sununu is the governor of New Hampshire.
Not her new husband.
No, not her new. Okay. I'm joking. I'm making. Oh, I said that too seriously.
Second, I was like, holy crap.
Yeah, I have a problem with sarcasm. Some people don't know when I'm being sarcastic.
No, which is funny because I know, like, I recently read something about her husband, so I knew that wasn't the case. Yeah. But I was like, oh, like it would make so much sense.
No, I know. Yeah. But like, there's pictures up of like Chris Sununu and Nikki Haley watching the sunrise in Kingston, New Hampshire, and it's like, it's just so good. Funny.
Yeah.
Now more about Nikki Haley. All right, she is a union buster. This is important to recognize because Trump likes to go out there and say that he's fighting for the working person, even though he's not. And we can go on and on about the policies of the reason that he's not. You can actually look on our channel and find videos where we talked about Donald Trump and what he did that was anti-labor. But in this area, I want to talk about how Nikki Haley is way worse than Trump on labor. And it's not even close. All Republican candidates that were on the debate stage recently are very prominently against labor. They all came out against the United Auto Workers strike very hard. But no one has been as anti-labor as Nikki Haley throughout her life or in her current rhetoric. During her time as governor in South Carolina, she waged an open war on organized labor. And she even said explicitly that she would rather sacrifice job opportunities coming into the state than have union jobs enter the state. Because as she said it, she didn't want to poison the waters. And that's how she views organized labor and the labor movement and unions, that it's poison to the labor market. When she was elected in 2010 as the governor, she reached out to CEOs specifically saying, this is a quote, "We are going to make sure that you have a lot of loyal, willing workforce, and we are going to continue to be one of the lowest union participation states in the entire country." Well, she got her wish. South Carolina, as of 2022, has a union participation rate of around 1.7%. 1.7%.
Wow.
It also, not surprisingly, has one of the highest poverty rates in the United States. The South Carolina ranks 37th among 50 states when it comes to entry-level manufacturing pay, and we know that manufacturing is one of the most efficient places to be in a union. Manufacturing workers have some of the highest wage premiums when they join a union, and she has signed many pieces of legislation that are anti-union, one of which prohibited government agencies from requiring contractors to sign project labor agreements or pacts with unions. So totally stop anything that has to do with the government trying to push more unions into the state. Anything that was going to give rise to that union participation rate, she was going to squash. She even discouraged companies that have unions from wanting to come to South Carolina. One example of this was Boeing. Boeing was one company that wanted to do business in South Carolina, and she specifically fought against it because Boeing's workforce was unionized.
It's crazy.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
The AFL-CIO made a statement on this at the time, and they said South Carolina ranks near the bottom nationally on a wide range of measurements on health, quality of life, such as infant mortality, drug deaths, preventable hospitalizations, and Haley's strong opposition to workers' rights is a key component of many of the state's low rankings. And I couldn't agree more. We know when people are in a union, they make more money, they have a better sense of community, they have better job security. Better job security leads to better mental health, better pay leads to better childhood outcomes, which leads to generational wealth growth. All the things that unions fight for are in the interest of the working class. And so Haley's direct war against labor unions is a war on working people. End of story. And that's what her presidency would be.
Definitely. Oh my God. I can't, like the UAW movement, not to mention the actors and writers strike that happened in Hollywood and several other labor movements that we've talked about since Biden's administration has come in. Those would never happen under a Haley administration.
They would be squashed so fast.
Yeah.
There would be and all the great positive things that have been done with the National Labor Relations Board under Biden would be gone in a second under a Nikki Haley administration. Yeah. I also believe they would be gone in a second under a Trump administration, but he's just not dumb enough to say it out loud. The same way he didn't say it out loud in 2015 and 16 when he was running for president, but then appointed some of the worst labor representatives on the NLRB that we've ever seen.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
Because the truth at the end of the day, he's just taking whatever the Republican Party gives him.
Yes.
So
it's so hard to make the anti-union argument in my mind, because the one thing that I think about is like, okay, maybe it's harmful to startups, right? It's harmful to small companies that can't afford to pay workers that much, but unions don't exist at small companies and startups. The whole point is it's so that they can siphon more of the profits that are going to the board members and the shareholders of these enormous like automobile companies, right? So it's just so clearly the right thing to do for working people. And it's ridiculous that someone like Haley would try to keep them out of their state.
We've done a whole deep dive about the benefits of unions. You can find that video on our channel. It's one of our longest ones and one of our best. We did a history of the UAW where we actually talked about their positives and their negatives. Yeah. They had corruption scandals, but they've reformed, and unions are more open and more democratic than they've ever been.
Don't get me wrong. Unions can be bad, just like any kind of organization.
Anything can be bad.
Right? But within the system that we're talking about of capitalism, unions are a good force for the people who need it most.
Mm-hmm. It's really a necessary force.
Yeah.
So Nikki Haley's not a friend of working people. We've gone over that. But Who's endorsing her then? Someone must like her. I'll tell you exactly who loves her. J.P. Morgan, the CEO of Chase Bank, Jamie Dimon, all right? He loves her. He absolutely loves her. He said that he wants liberal Democrats who live in New Hampshire to go and vote for Nikki Haley in the Republican primary so that she can stay alive throughout the primary process. We have Charles Koch. He backed with his super PAC, Americans for Prosperity, has raised $70 million in the first half of the year, including $25 million from billionaire Koch and his nonprofit groups, have given all of that money to helping endorse and helping propel Nikki Haley to the front of the Republican primary. We have other billionaires who have previously supported Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, like Ken Griffin and the Home Depot co-founder Ken Lagone. These guys have been DeSantis guys from day one.
Yeah.
DeSantis boys from day one. And now they're all Haley.
It's so funny to see how blatantly they just switch off to the next Trump alternative as soon as it's clear that DeSantis isn't a viable one.
They're just trying to pick winners, bro.
Yeah.
Like you say, the money always chases the winners, right?
Exactly.
That's what's happening. The money is trying to chase the winners.
Yeah.
And this one is, I find, so interesting. One of the billionaires who actually support the Democratic Party, Reid Hoffman, he is a co-founder of LinkedIn, and he has been a very, very anti-Trump voice throughout Trump's tenure. And he has been supportive of Democrats in 2018, 2020, 2022. But now that Nikki Haley is in the mix, he is no longer loyal to the Democratic Party, and he has switched his allegiances. And he is now giving money to Nikki Haley and has endorsed her for president. Which should tell you everything you need to know. Okay? This is a guy, Reid Hoffman, who was anti-Trump for some of the right reasons. He was anti-Trump for his threats against democracy, which I appreciate. He was against Trump for his probably bad attacks against illegal immigrants, which is what I appreciate. But the second he finds an alternative way to get his taxes cut and unions busted, this guy's going to take it. And so all the billionaires who line up behind the Democratic Party, they're not your friends. They're not your friends. That's just the way I see it.
Yeah,
I'm being very vitriolic here.
Yes. Yeah, I'm on the other side.
Yeah.
Right, because what's the harm? Cost benefit.
Right.
Right. Like listen.
Oh, like I'm still going to take their money.
Exactly. I will take their money, and I'm okay. Like I'm okay with the idea of Democrats going and voting for Haley at the primary ballots.
Oh, really?
Totally.
Oh, that's interesting.
Totally.
Why?
Well, because it's such a greater risk for Trump to win. Right? Like, so I guess you're thinking about different paths down the decision tree, right? Where it's like, okay, so if Haley gets the nomination, then Haley versus Biden, we're scared is going to be more competitive. We're scared that Haley has a better chance of winning.
Yes.
However, a Haley presidency would not be as scary, disastrous, catastrophic, eliminating of our democracy as a Trump presidency
That's
would.
true.
On the other hand, if Trump wins, then it's more likely that Biden will be the president, which also means that we don't have to worry about crackdowns on unions, that we get more investment in climate change proposals. So I guess it's a risk aversion versus maximizing your gains.
Yeah.
You're
on the risk aversion
terrified of what Trump might do to our democracy that I do fall on the risk aversion side.
No, and I respect that. I understand that.
Yeah.
I definitely think I look at like what happened in 2022 and where Democrats actually gave money to far right wing candidates in swing states in the House. And then because those far right wing candidates ended up winning their primary elections, the Democrats were able to hold a lot of seats in the House because they went up against such unelectable opponents.
True.
I think the same thing can be said about Trump. I think Nikki Haley is a much stronger opponent. And I am actually nervous because a lot of people don't know this side of her. And because they don't know this side of her, I'm nervous she could win. So if we were to do an expected value of which one is most likely to happen, I think this is the worst case scenario that's most likely to happen. I don't think the Trump winning is, I mean, I know it's a possibility, but I think Nikki Haley beating Biden is almost a sure bet.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Perhaps.
Yeah. But no, listen, I do respect the idea of a Nikki Haley presidency is better than a Trump presidency, full stop.
Yes.
It is. There's no doubt about it.
Certainly.
Yes. It is. And it's important to recognize that at least.
Yeah.
Because that leads to more productive political conversations, I think. When we're trying to talk about like, oh, all Republicans are evil. The truth is not all Republicans are evil. What I just described to you about Nikki Haley doesn't make her evil. It just means I disagree with her on policies. And I'm going to fight her. I'm going to fight her to my death about those policies. But I'm not going to think that she's going to not let me vote anymore.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And there are different, yes, that's the different level of bad versus evil.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. There's bad and then there's evil. Trump is evil. Nikki Haley is bad.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to move on to a really nerdy one here.
Hell yeah. That's what we're about. That's why you come to this show.
Yes.
You can get my liberal talking points on any other show. But this, no one else is talking about this.
Yeah. The bureaucracy that we just love to get into. So the Biden administration produced rules for its hydrogen tax credit that's going to come out of the Inflation Reduction Act. So hydrogen is seen as a promising tool to tackle climate change. It's a new form of fuel. When burned, it mainly emits water vapor, which it actually is also a greenhouse gas, but it's very short-lived in the atmosphere because it's kept in balance by the hydrologic cycle, right? So if there's too much water vapor emitted into the atmosphere, it just comes down as rain, and we don't have to worry about it warming the earth too much. So the IRA included $13.1 billion in subsidies for hydrogen fuel. But the thing is, immediately some experts came out and they were worried about the hydrogen subsidies causing a spike in fossil fuel emissions. And so you might think, why is that? Well, because making hydrogen requires energy, and very little of the hydrogen made today is made with clean energy.
That's really interesting.
Right? So these rules came out, and you had the experts that were saying, make sure to place restrictions on the fuel with which the hydrogen is made. And you have the businesses, the hydrogen developers that's like, no, if you put these kinds of rules on it, it's going to cost way more. And then we're not going to be able to innovate as much or to develop as much. Biden fell on the side of the experts who warned against the emissions, right? So he made rules that the hydrogen producers have to draw energy from new, clean sources. And it requires new energy sources so that the production is less likely to require a spike in fossil fuels elsewhere to compensate, right? So it's like you don't want a solar source that's been in use for 15 years, because if that solar source has already been providing energy to part of the grid and now it's half of that energy is being used by the hydrogen producer, well, the fossil fuels are still going to have to compensate for it, right? So the rule is it has to be from energy sources that were made in the past 3 years. This will create barriers, okay? Making hydrogen cleanly costs about 3 times as much as making it from natural gas, which is pretty much entirely how it's made today. So this is going to make it a lot harder for the hydrogen producers. The one other thing I'll say is the nuclear industry asked for the hydrogen tax credits to be made available for them, but this is a more controversial part of the rules, and the administration has pushed that decision off until they receive public comment. So it might still come through, but they wanted to procrastinate on it.
This seems as like they kind of shot for the moon here, and they didn't really think past they didn't think about step one. Right.
Bit.
They didn't think about it. They didn't think, they were like, oh no, hydrogen's a clean energy source.
Yeah.
Let's definitely give subsidies for hydrogen. But then you realize if we're making it with fossil fuels and it's emitting that much more carbon into the atmosphere, it really not helping anybody.
Yeah.
Nuclear would. And
Yes.
I am a big proponent of nuclear.
Yeah, we're both big proponents of nuclear. They still seem to be scared about the political implications of going all in on nuclear, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like almost everyone who has looked into nuclear is a huge fan of it.
Yes.
But everyone else who hears nuclear
And
they
thinks
just
Chernobyl.
think Chernobyl. Yeah, and then they're scared and they're against it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, we should, I don't know. I mean, I feel like we should think about Chernobyl the same way you think about a really bad oil spill, right? A really bad oil spill happens and it kills a bunch of people and destroys a whole environment. And we didn't stop using oil because of it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I guess
it obviously has way worse consequences than an oil spill.
I think we're just more scared of what radiation burns and radiation poisoning. It does feel scarier.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the only question I think I'm on board, right? Again, this cost benefit, I think the costs of the spike in emissions, when that's the one thing that we're trying to combat with these rules, it's not worth risking.
No.
So I'm on board with this. I don't know if there's really any cost, like a 3x on how much it costs to make the hydrogen definitely is not enough for me to think that the rules should be more lax. It would, I feel like it would have to be like 50x or something.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
So generally happy with this. Biden wants to try to make 50 times the amount of hydrogen that we make right now for fuel by 2050. This will be a part of it, even though it's going to cost more. There was one company in Texas, I forgot what it was, that already pledged $4 billion in investment to making hydrogen, and they're going to use some of these subsidies. So it definitely will help. We'll just have to see how much it does.
That's beautiful. I mean, like, it's so cool and futuristic to think about, like, oh man, our cars are going to be emitting water. Yeah. Like, that's kind of sick to think about.
It is awesome.
It's just, I'm not a science guy. I'm like a math person. I never, I'm like a data scientist. That's what I do. I don't know a lot about science. So when I start reading about it for this podcast, whether it's carbon capture, whether it be green energy generally, whether it be hydrogen, I just always get so shocked about how far we actually are, Yeah.
Yeah, it is cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one we got here is a lawsuit filed by the New York Times against OpenAI and Microsoft for ChatGPT.
Oh, baby.
So we are on the frontier, right, of copyright law, basically. Again, super exciting, of how are media companies going to deal with these generative AI models like ChatGPT that people can go to for that similar kind of information. So what happened here? On the 27th of December, the Times sued OpenAI and Microsoft for copyright infringement, claiming they had used the content of millions of New York Times articles to train their models, which now compete with the Times as a reliable source of information. It says the defendants should be held liable for billions of dollars in damages, billions with a B, and it also calls for the companies to destroy any chatbots and training data that uses info from the Times.
Wow.
The Times is the first media company to bring a lawsuit against an AI company. And what was interesting to me is that they said that they had approached OpenAI and Microsoft in April to come to a business agreement so it didn't have to go to court, but it didn't pan out.
Oh, geez.
Which to me, I'm thinking, right, the OpenAI and Microsoft executives were trying to just kick the can down the road.
Yeah.
I'm thinking they knew this was going to be a problem, and they wanted to get as much market share as they can, buy as much time as they could before having to face this. And the Times probably caught on.
I've been saying this since day one. The biggest problem with ChatGPT and chatbots like it is its inability to cite information. ChatGPT 4 has gotten better with it.
Oh, really?
Yes. It will give you quotes. Like if you ask it a specific question about modern day, it'll go to Bing, find information at the modern day, and then give you a little link on where it found that information.
Wow.
Yeah, which is huge. Because I didn't know that I think it's easier when it's searching the internet rather than just its repository of articles.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, do you have to, are you specifically asking it
to go to the internet?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
If it's a question that it recognizes and needs modern day information,
okay,
then it will go to Bing.
Okay.
Sometimes sometimes you have to prompt it to say, go to Bing and find the info for me.
Okay.
Sometimes, but not all the time. Anyway, but sometimes citation isn't just enough. If you're literally taking word for word things from the New York Times and then putting quotes around it, and you're literally just reprinting their article, guess what? You can't do that.
Yeah. Well, in the lawsuit, the Times cites several examples of prompts that are given to ChatGPT that will be like, there's this article in the Times that's behind a paywall. I want to know what it says. Can you give me the first paragraph? And it'll give the exact first paragraph. And then it'll be like, okay, can you give me the second paragraph? And it'll give the exact second paragraph. So I think the Times has a great case.
And I think they're right. I think this is exactly, I love AI. I love ChatGPT. But New York Times needs to make some money off of it.
Yes.
End of story.
Yeah.
You need to. If Microsoft is making money off of it, then so do they. End of story. But they need some type of royalty system.
It's super hard, right? Like
it is.
What is I was trying to think, what is the vision for this? Because we've talked about this before. These large language models are just guessing what the next best word is, right? So if that's all they are, and you, like, how do you create a system where you're checking every response you give if it's directly plagiarized from something?
Well, not only that, how do you check it to see if it comes from a New York Times article?
And right. That I don't even expect is possible.
I don't even think is possible.
Yeah.
I don't think that's possible.
I don't think that's possible. And so I don't know, and I think we are going to face issues here on, I think this is really going to block AI development.
It totally will. It will. And it's going to be hard to get over.
Yeah.
It is. It's going to be hard to get over.
And there aren't even like it's not that strict. These copyright laws, they're not so strict about getting information from somewhere. As in what am I trying to say? Like, we get information from the Times all the time.
Oh, all the time.
And we talk about it. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to pay them, or, I mean, we pay for our subscriptions. And ChatGPT, or the developers at OpenAI, have obviously paid for New York Times subscriptions to be able to scrape all that data.
Yes.
But the fair use legal doctrine, which kind of defines what you're able to talk about without giving credit or without paying a source of news, basically means that as long as you put any kind of spin on it, as long as you add any kind of creativity or make it unique in any way, basically as long as you're not plagiarizing word for word,
right,
or showing the exact like video that a content producer has made, then you're fine. So it's hard to know, like, how would an OpenAI be able to draw the line on one of their videos and be like, okay, this is one that we have to pay the Times for, or on one of their like text responses, right? This one we have to pay for. This one, the words are far enough off that we're good.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Does it need to, would it be enough for the New York Times to just accept that everything that they pull from them is going to be slightly reworded?
Yeah.
Is that enough for the New York Times? Probably not, because you're still not transforming the content in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
You're filling in the real purpose of the fair use clauses and stuff is to make sure that the content, or the reason the user is going to your content and not the original content, is for different purposes. Mm-hmm. That's really the main goal. You come to us to hear us talk about articles you read in the New York Times or Politico or The Economist or the Wall Street Journal, not because you just want to know what's going on in the Wall Street Journal and all these magazines, because you want to hear us talk about it. You want to hear our opinions on it, our analysis of it,
yes,
the implications of it,
exactly,
that maybe the authors of these articles didn't think about. Mm-hmm. That's why you come to us. You're not coming to us just for that information, but a lot of people are using ChatGPT just to get the information from the New York Times without paying.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that can't be allowed. I'm wondering about a model where maybe they can just pay an annual lump sum. Mm-hmm. Maybe it can just be $3 billion a year. Like we've talked about before, how Google pays Apple $12 billion a year to be the default search engine on Safari. Mm-hmm. Maybe they can get something like that.
But does OpenAI have the money to throw $3 billion towards every company that they use?
No. $3 billion a year, but the Times. Do you think the Times would? I mean, I guess they are suing for billions.
Right,
So
they're suing for billions.
Yeah,
this could end.
It's wild.
This could end AI development as we know it, and I think it's kind of for the right cause. I mean, I'm in the space of AI development, and one of the things I'm working on is making chatbots that utilize company information. I hope I didn't just break an NDA. Anyway,
you're probably good.
I'm probably fine.
That was very vague.
Every company's doing something like that.
Yeah, that was super vague.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess. Never mind.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
So the point is,
less information is better.
Yeah, less information is better. AI is not going to die from this, but it will change the way it's being developed.
Yeah, I think so.
That was really funny.
Yeah, that was good. The one other thing that I want to mention before we move on is whether this will eliminate the US's lead in AI development, because that's an important point that Andreessen Horowitz pointed out when they complained about this lawsuit going into effect. And I think it could, right? Because like China is never going to institute a law like this if it's going to restrict their development. No
way. Europe is restricting their AI development through their AI rules and regulations.
Yes.
Which I'm grateful for. obviously,
Yeah.
but it is going to restrict the development of AI that happens inside the European Union.
It is, but even that I think is less restrictive.
You think that's less restrictive?
I
than
do.
You know what? I think you're right, because this isn't talking about billions of dollars in payouts. That's all about ethic rules.
Yeah, that's like certain types of models. It's like
Yeah.
you can't do
Deep
like
fakes.
Yes, this is going like every major chatbot would be affected by this. Will be affected by this.
Will be affected by this.
Yeah, and those are the most basic and also the most useful types of AI we have.
Yep.
So
No, it's gonna be big.
it's gonna be crazy.
All right. We are now going on to the depressing stuff. We have updates in the Palestinian-Israeli war. And I also want to talk about some internal Israeli politics that's going on that is really important for us to understand the home front of the war in Israel. So first, I want to talk about where we are. So the war has been going on for 3 months. We have 20,000 dead in Gaza, and 1.1 million people are currently in danger of starvation. People are so hungry that they are eating food off of the ground that is being thrown off of the trucks, because these aid trucks that do end up getting into Gaza, that are becoming less and less as time goes on, as it becomes more and more difficult to get humanitarian aid to the people who need it, these trucks are getting ravaged by starving people. And the truckers and the UN officials who are helping distribute the aid are throwing the food onto the ground while people are scavenging it, trying to get as much food as they can for their family. Now, Israel is actually in the middle of scaling back their offensive because of economic troubles that they're having at home. Israel is having a shortage of working-aged men, working-aged women, and so this is causing their economy to go into a bit of a slump and recession. So they're pulling back military men and women from the front to get them back to work. Military leaders are suggesting that this is not because of a lack of will or because of a lack of objective. I will take issue with that lack of objective thing. I do think it's a change in objective, and I'll talk about that later. But Israel is still very committed to fighting Hamas to the end. And this scale back, while is probably good for the Palestinian people in the short term, will be just a delay until the Israelis get more of a focus and a better economic situation at home.
It's a blip, nothing more.
Yeah, it's a blip.
Yeah.
We have Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, who are two high-ranking U.S. intelligence officials, Blinken being the Secretary of State, are pleading with the Israelis to change their focus. They are begging them to do more targeted strikes and change the focus of the war. They are citing the fact that Israel is losing goodwill with the majority of the Western world, and it's making it hard for the U.S. government to sell giving weapons to the Israelis at home, because obviously President Biden is facing flack for funding the onslaught of, honestly, pretty blatant attacks on civilians.
Yeah.
And it's on purpose. And I'll talk about that in a second.
Did you happen to see the Times article that came out, I think like 3 days ago, that was an in-depth look at what has been going on behind the scenes in the Biden administration on this? Okay. Because there was a lot in there, but a clear takeaway is that no matter what the members of his administration will want or push for, Biden is not budging on his support.
No.
Right? Like at all.
That's why he's secretly selling weapons to Israel through a backdoor channel without approval from Congress.
Yeah. I mean, not secretly.
No, not
like,
secretly.
It's
we know
reported.
what's happening, but
Yeah.
he's doing it without approval from Congress.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I don't know, that hurts me. And I part of what I got from it too is like Blinken and Sullivan, who are totally on the front lines of all of this, these discussions with Israel, are they're hamstrung, or they have no leverage.
None.
Right?
Because Biden will always give them what they want,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah. And it's a terror. Like, I hate it.
I hate it.
I hate it.
This is the one area where Joe Biden is just terrible.
Yeah.
Just
terrible.
It's just terrible because he had such a good, from my perspective, a good start on foreign policy. His pullout of Afghanistan was always going to be messy. But the fact that he was able to do it and get us out of one of the longest wars in American history,
Yeah.
and cut drone strikes down by, I'm talking like 98% less drone strikes than what Trump does.
Yeah.
It's a massive achievement why is this the one hill that he's willing to die on?
Yeah.
And it makes no sense to me. And Israel is only spreading the pain further and further and more frequent and more frequent. Israel has currently been using 2,000-pound bombs on the city of Rafah and the area around Rafah. Rafah is notable because it's on the border with Egypt, and it's also notable because that's where Israel told all the civilians to go. They told the civilians to head south and head to the city of Rafah. Well, the New York Times has actually mapped out these bombs and the sites of the bombs droppings and have confirmed that Israel has been targeting regions of Israel regions of Gaza that Israel had previously designated as safe for civilians. These 2,000-pound bombs are not supposed to be used on civilian centers. The U.S. has actually sworn off of doing so. If the United States, the country that is still okay with using cluster bombs, is saying that this is too much to use against civilians, and you start using them, you lost the plot.
Yeah, our credibility has evaporated.
Absolutely evaporated. And now Israel is dropping these bombs that is not designed for civilian targeting on some of the most densely civilian populated areas in the world.
Yeah.
We're talking about areas that are more densely populated than Paris are being hit with 2,000-pound munitions.
Yeah.
Buildings just being gone, craters being left in its wake. And people dying for no good reason.
Well, I'm going to add a piece of context that also comes from this article that's going to make this a little bit more nuanced.
Okay.
According to Israel and IDF forces, the tunnels that they have found, the tunnel networks underneath Gaza that Hamas hides out in, are apparently much more extensive than was even revealed. And apparently they're equivalent to like multi-story buildings underground. And part of Israel's argument is the only way you can do any damage to those are with massive airstrikes, massive bombing. So this isn't to say that I condone it, because I think at that point, your cost-benefit analysis says the cost, like no matter what the benefit, the cost of what we're doing to these people is too much. But that's where they're coming from.
Yeah, and I understand that. I understand that militarily,
Yeah.
this is the best way to take out Hamas.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. If you want to destroy their tunnel networks, even if their tunnel network is sitting on, a residential building holding 100 people, the best military avenue is to, bomb that building.
Yeah.
And I get it.
And I think, I mean, from Israel's perspective, it's probably like, I don't care. I just think they don't care at all about killing all of these people. All they care about is eliminating Hamas, protecting Israelis, and as long as they do that, they will go through as many Gazan civilians as they feel they have to.
Yeah, and I want to say I want to say negative things about Hamas all the time, but I'll say this negative thing about Hamas. Hamas utilizing these tunnel networks that they know are in civilian areas should be considered a war crime in and of itself.
Yes.
Right? Because they're using humans as human shields, which is not something you're really allowed to do. And what makes it difficult is what's technically a civilian versus military target is if the country doing the bombing can prove that civilian infrastructure is being utilized for military purposes, that building no longer becomes a civilian building. It is no longer civilian infrastructure, and that country now has full right to go and bomb that building if they can prove that things are being held in it, on it, around it, near it, utilized by the enemy.
And Hamas does that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it makes it really, really difficult because it would actually be somewhat of a hard sell if you can prove that these tunnels are underneath these buildings, which I think they have proven to a good extent.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah. It makes it hard because you see 20,000 dead and you like.
The civilian casualty rate is way higher here than it was in Ukraine. And is in Ukraine.
Oh my God, yeah. I don't think 20,000 civilians have died in Ukraine yet.
I don't think so either.
So, it's just so, I find my mind so wanting to get to some level of black and white, right? I want to be at different points in this conflict, you just want to be able to say the Israelis are totally bad, but then it's like, okay, Hamas is constantly using people as human shields. They're putting all of their military equipment in hospitals, schools, other civilian buildings. And so international law says that now it's okay to attack those, right? But they've also killed 20,000 civilians.
It made 1.1 million people on the edge of starvation.
Yeah, like
God, to what point, man? To what point are we going to need a different type of settlement here? And now we have the radicals on both sides of the conflict not wanting a settlement. They don't want one.
Yeah.
The radicals on both sides of this conflict, the right wing in Israel, the Islamic extremists in Gaza, no one wants peace.
Yeah.
Both of them want conquering, extermination of the other side.
One thing I will say to Biden's credit, at least according to that Times article I read, is that Netanyahu is probably saying this for political reasons, but he was saying that he is the only thing standing in front of Biden's two-state solution. So one thing that we know is Biden has been pushing for a two-state solution.
Yeah,
he
forever.
said that publicly.
I mean, he said that since the 70s.
Yes. But they're words, right? And his actions are preventing it actively. So
actively.
Yeah.
And now let's get into Netanyahu.
Yes.
Let's talk about him.
Yes.
Let's talk about his political situation because it's really interesting. Yeah. Netanyahu did a really, really intense power grab sometime last year where he was trying to reform the way the Supreme Court operated. The Supreme Court operates very differently from the way we operate here, and I want to go over that briefly before we go into it. So the Supreme Court is chosen not by legislators and not by voters. It's chosen by a committee of experts in the field and some political appointees. So the people who appoint the Supreme Court is a chairman, a cabinet minister who is chosen by the cabinet, 2 Knesset members, are chosen by the Knesset, 2 members of the Bar Association, which are legal scholars, and then the Chief Justice and 2 other judges from the Supreme Court, which are replaced every 3 years by a panel of judges.
Okay, and the Knesset is the legislative body in Israel, to be clear.
It's their equivalent of the parliament. So that is who picks these things. Okay, I'm not an expert on Israeli law, on Israeli government. I'm not. This is my understanding of it. Right now, there are 15 judges that make that operate the Supreme Court.
Yep.
We had a decision. Oh, and then so what was the reform that Netanyahu wanted to do? The reform would have permitted the Knesset to override any ruling by the Supreme Court by introducing new legislation that could be approved with a simple majority. This basically would have eliminated the power of judicial review entirely in Israel. It would have neutered any power in the Supreme Court at all. Now, this is important because a lot of the things that the hard right in Israel wants to accomplish are things that the Supreme Court deems too radical, too religious, too ethno-nationalist. And the Supreme Court, mainly those who have been appointed by the Bar Association, have been non-conducive with what Netanyahu's goals are. So that's why he was trying to strip power away from the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court shot down his judicial reform only 8-7. Very, very close. It's interesting to me that the Supreme Court was so close at neutering its own power, but it makes sense in the context of a lot of the Knesset members a lot of the Knesset members or people who are on this Supreme Court voted in by Knesset members, I should say, have been done by Netanyahu's party. So it makes sense. But this is the first time all 15 judges were present for a vote for the first time in the nation's history. Wow. Before this time, there has never been a moment where all 15 judges showed up to a vote.
Wow.
This is the first time it happened.
That's crazy. So one thing I heard about with this decision is Israel doesn't have a constitution.
No constitution.
So this is the Supreme Court, because of that, right? Like, that's why there's this ambiguity as to how much power the court has versus the Knesset.
I will say there isn't a constitution, but they have a thing called the basic laws.
Yes.
Which operate as a constitution light, which is what the Supreme Court uses as judicial review against.
Exactly. And what I wanted to bring up is there was another case that went through in concert with this one that basically confirmed that the court could decide on these quasi-constitutional basic laws, and that one passed 12-3 in the Supreme Court. So they not only shot down this law enabling the Knesset to override them, but they confirmed that they could do that. So it really ended up consolidating a lot of power for the court, I think.
And I do think there is some democratic element to this to say, wait a second, a lot of these judges aren't elected. A lot of these judges can't be, thoroughly overturned and stuff. So they might be all over too powerful. And I can understand that.
Sure.
I can understand that interpretation. But if you're going to make it so hyper partisan that it's going to be appointed from the legislative branch, the court might as well not exist.
Yeah, true. The whole point of the court is to check the legislative branch.
Right.
Yeah.
So the far right wing in Israel was not happy about this. The extremely far right national security minister has said the ruling was illegal and a threat to the nation's overall democracy. It's insane to call it illegal.
Well, it's so crazy to me, like the amount of beef now internally just in the government.
Oh yeah.
Right? Just trying to take power, the different branches from each other.
Mm-hmm. Many questioned the timing of the ruling, and they said that it was bad for national unity. But the Supreme Court was smart. They knew they had to get this done ASAP. Because of soon-to-be retirements, the vote would have actually failed 7-6.
Wow.
It would have failed if it was taken just in later January. Wow. It would have failed.
That's crazy.
It is crazy, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we're at now in the situation. Netanyahu is becoming more and more unpopular. The governing coalition is more and more unstable, and Israel is still in the middle of a massive war.
Yeah. So
not a good place to be for anybody.
No. Weirdly, though, I do think the war is maintaining more unity than there would otherwise be.
Oh, I totally agree with that. Yeah. The national unity that comes from wartime is always important. Think about America after 9/11, right? I mean, everyone rallied around the flag back then.
Yeah.
All right, now let's get into some United States economy news. We have a slowdown in the residential real estate market, which should be a surprise to nobody. Because of higher interest rates, we are seeing an increase in the average payment for a house, and this is causing overall housing purchases to decline. The Wall Street Journal did an analysis on home inspectors, and home inspectors are seeing a massive plummet in their number of jobs that they have to do each month, because people just aren't looking to buy homes and aren't looking to inspect things. Yeah. Homes are one of the commodities that are most affected by interest rates, specifically because of how tied it is to mortgages and loans. And, same thing with car prices. Car prices go up a lot when interest rates go up because so many people finance their cars. Purchases that are done through financing are going to be hit the most with rising interest rates, right? So home sales were down 7% last year. This is for two major reasons. Would-be buyers are facing a lack of homes on the market generally, which is causing prices to rise because many people locked in really good interest rates 5 years ago. And now maybe they would have sold and moved away and done something different, maybe go and buy a condo somewhere. Not anymore. Yeah. They're staying in that home because they have a 4% interest rate locked in, and they should stay in that home for the rest of their lives. There's no reason to leave.
Yeah. At least for a very long time.
Right. And now baby boomers just don't have a reason to downsize. There's no reason.
Not only that, sometimes baby boomers can't downsize because of restrictive zoning laws that have made it so that there are no smaller homes in their communities to even look for. And again, since these prices are so high, they can't afford it.
And And if they were going to finance a new home or finance a new condo, why give up the rate?
Exactly.
There's no reason.
Yeah.
So this is leading to people renting longer, as now mortgage payments are now more expensive than renting. Now, in American history, that used to be the case. It used to be normal that mortgage payments were more money than renting. That was normal. Throughout the 70s and up into the 2000s, mortgage payments were always more. But after the 2008 recession, mortgage payments actually became cheaper than renting. This was because of the historically low interest rates that we saw, the quantitative easing, the putting money back into the economy so people could buy things, right? Yeah. That's why mortgage rates dropped below. I'll give an example. In 2006, the average mortgage payment was $1,518, while the average cost to rent was $1,000, a whole $500 difference. Now, when we get into 2011, which is when this difference became the most prominent, an average monthly house cost was around $900 and rent was $1,200. Yeah. It became way more expensive to rent because of just how cheap borrowing money was. Well, now, here we are today in 2023, and cost to buy is $2,700 a month, with the cost to rent being $1,800 a month.
Insane.
It's an insane different world we are living in. And I just don't see the cost to buy really converging back to cost to rent.
You don't?
I don't see it. That's a lot of ground to make up, man.
I think it'll take time, but I think it's going.
I mean, we need to see a lot of interest rate cuts to get that. We would need, like, we're going to see 3 interest rate cuts in 2024.
But it's not just interest rate cuts.
What else do we need? More housing
supply,
production?
Right. Yeah. And I think both of those things are going to happen.
Okay.
I say let's check back in 2028. I think we're going to be seeing rent will still cost less, but I think we're going to be closer to, say, the levels that we're seeing in the 90s.
That I could agree with. I could agree with that. But I think the norm of rent being more expensive is gone. I don't know if we're going to get back to the world of rent being more expensive than buying.
Oh, sure.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't see us going back to 0% interest rates.
No, I don't either. But I don't think we want to.
No, we don't.
Right?
That's an interesting question that I haven't thought about. I think building assets is better than renting. If more of the middle and working classes are able to have assets and the home being your most valuable asset, I think that's better than renting.
I don't know about the home being most valuable as being a good thing, but I do think the stability of home ownership over renting is good. Of course, and the problem is that buying a home costs more upfront. So necessarily people who make less money are going to have to rent. And so implying that they're going to have to still pay more doesn't seem good.
Yes. It's a very hard conversation.
Yeah.
That could be a whole deep dive in itself. What's better, buying or renting?
Yeah.
The short version is depends on where you are in life and how much money you have in the bank.
Yeah.
That's
the short version. And the other bottom line here is that both are insanely expensive right now.
Yes. I want to skip our next one and go down to what's going on in China with their manufacturing, just because we're on economics.
Yeah.
So manufacturing in China. Oh, wait, you know what? I'm sorry. I want to stick on the U.S. economy. It's still the same thing. Manufacturing output, okay? So we're going to talk about manufacturing output and how it has still not grown in the United States. Over the last 13 months, the United States has not seen any increase in its manufacturing output. Manufacturing output in the United States is not doing great. This is very hard to understand because this is in contradiction to what we see with manufacturing investment. Manufacturing investment is at an all-time high by record numbers, and we'll talk about that, but manufacturing output has been declining the last 13 months. This is because of interest rates going up. Some manufacturing facilities have actually been sitting on a surplus of goods that they produced in 2022 and 2023 that they're still liquidating.
A big part of this problem, I think, as well, is permitting.
Yeah.
There have been multiple announcements for major projects that are specifically taking subsidies from the Inflation Reduction Act being pushed back to 2025 because there's so much red tape that these companies have to cut through to actually be able to build anything.
Samsung with their fab, they were supposed to have a fab up and running.
Samsung, TSMC.
All of it got pushed to 2025. Should have been this year.
Exactly.
Should have been 2024.
We talked about how the offshore wind company Ørsted that was trying to build two facilities off of New Jersey, they canceled their projects. That one was more because of financing.
Yeah, that one was more interest rates.
Yes.
But we are right now the build nothing country, and we need to change that very, very fast.
Exactly. Yeah.
We really do. So again, a lot of these companies have a lot of surplus that they've been liquidating. But things are on the up, and Americans should know that. We have a lot of manufacturing investment that is truly something special that has not been seen in this nation's history, I would say since World War II. We have manufacturing construction rise 40% in 2022 and has risen 72% through the first 10 months of 2023. It's truly record-breaking manufacturing growth, and this will lead to more manufacturing output in the years ahead. It just matters how fast we get these things online.
Yeah.
That's what matters.
And there needs to be urgency here. There needs to be, especially when China could attack Taiwan any day. And as we continue to emit a crazy amount of fossil fuels.
Yes. Now, manufacturer surveys do suggest that 2024 will be better than 2023, despite the delays in projects that we've talked about. Manufacturers suspect that their revenues will grow by 5.6% in 2024. This is up from 0.9% in 2023.
Yeah.
So that is good because these revenues will be coming from increased output, which is going to be good to see. This is also coming from the supply chain being all fixed up and everyone having all the resources and input goods that they need to make their finished products. So that is all positive information, but we are still in 13 months of a contracting manufacturing sector that's getting delayed by red tape, and it's a shame.
Yeah.
It's a shame because we should be on the top of the world right now, but we're not yet.
Yeah.
The Purchasing Managers Index for the United States, which is not a perfect metric by any means, but is a good one, is sitting around 47.6%, 47.6. Purchasing Managers Index is basically like an ask or a survey to all the people who are purchasing managers, who are buying input goods. And they're saying, are you buying more input goods than the year before or less? And so 47.6% are saying, I'm going to buy more than last year. That still indicates contraction, but the fact is that the United States has been sitting at 46 PMI, Purchasing Manager Index, for around the last 4 quarters. So the fact it's going up is a good direction for the U.S. to be in.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. In contrast to the U.S. economy, China is facing a lot of problems. Xi, in his New Year's Eve speech, said, on the path ahead, winds and rains are the norm. God damn, I can't think of a worse way to bring in the new year than tell that to your population.
Yeah, it's interesting because she has been trying to portray a message of strength for the economy despite issues piling up that everyone in the news, everyone around the world has been seeing. But I think things have gotten so bad and the people in China are feeling it so much that it's suddenly more advantageous for him to say, I understand that you're going through challenges.
That's exactly
that
right.
You're feeling this, and we're working on it.
That's exactly right. That's FDR, bro. That's what FDR did. Like during the Great Depression, he was like, I see you, I hear you. But what I don't hear from Xi, which I did hear from FDR, is that we have a pathway to get better.
Okay.
I don't hear that coming from Xi. I hear a lot of doom and gloom, and that might be because of the excerpts I read from the speech are coming from Western sources. I'll give you that caveat, all right? Okay. But I just don't see the positive spin coming from him. I see a lot of fear. I see a lot of like nationalist jingoism.
Okay, I did see something about the government is going to subsidize the economy to make this better.
Did you?
Yes, I saw something about that.
Okay, sure. My information is going to be a little different then.
Okay.
But we'll see.
Yeah.
So survey results, the PMI Managers Index, show that factory activity has slid deeper in December. So the PMI is on a decline in China and it's on an increase in the United States. China's PMI is sitting at 48. Again, US 47.6, but when we take into account the trends, US is on the up, China's on the down, has been on the down for a while. It's only been declining month over month, quarter after quarter. So in order to deal with this, Chinese banks are planning on lowering deposit rates for savers so they can offer manufacturers and other businesses better deals on loans. So they're having private banks take up the majority of the stimulus. That's what's happening.
Okay.
The stimulus is coming from private banks because the deposit rate, what is a deposit rate? It means if I give a bank $10, if you had a 100% deposit rate, they would hold on to that they would hold on to that $10. If you had a 50% deposit rate, they would hold $5 and then loan the other $5 out to somebody else so they could go do something with it.
Okay.
Well, now they're saying, say it's $5. Now they're going to say, you know what? The banks only have to keep $1. Let's loan out $9 and make the banks only have to keep $1.
Okay.
And this is where money gets generated, this fractured reserve banking system. This is where money is created in the United States and everywhere in the world. This is how money gets made, through these loans, through banks. This is very normal.
The lower the deposit rate, the riskier the bet.
But the lower the deposit rate, the riskier the bet. And that what's happening is China will be taking on a lot more debt. And unlike the United States, its debt is not so much held Chinese and American debt is similar on the governmental level. Okay, it's fairly similar on the governmental level. And in fact, in the governmental level, China might actually have less debt in its public sector as compared to the United States. But what's really interesting is when you take public debt out of the equation, when you remove government debt out of the equation, which is technically the safest form of debt, right? If you want to have any type of debt, you want public debt, because no one's calling the U.S. on our debt with F-35s and a nuclear arsenal, right?
Yeah.
It's totally different when you're dealing with banking systems and manufacturers that have debt. Well, when we look at the percent of GDP in relation to debt, okay, of Japan, U.S., China, the European Union, basically all Japan, U.S., European Union have GDP to debt rates of 150%. Again, this isn't including government debt. This is only private and corporation debt, okay? Well, in China, it's over 200. And so what's going to happen with this bank deposits and the loosening of these restrictions, China is only going to see an increase in this amount of private sector debt. And this private sector debt is going to be one hell of a bubble if it bursts.
Yeah.
It's a risky gamble, you know.
But that's where they're at.
That's where they're at. Now, why they don't take on more public sector debt? I think it's because the Chinese government isn't all that capable of doing so. I think the Chinese bureaucracy leaves a lot to its localities and states to run a lot of different economic systems. It does a lot. The local governments do a lot more in China than, honestly, what they do in the United States in a lot of ways. I mean, local states in China run their own welfare programs, their own social safety nets. They pick and choose their own infrastructure projects in a way that, like, the federal government doesn't really do. Like, think about the way the federal government kind of does we're talking about the Scranton, Pennsylvania down to New York City Amtrak line. It's a different process in China, and I don't think that they have the bureaucracy to really do a fiscal stimulus the way the U.S. does.
I think you're right. I also think the federal government in China has more leeway or more agency to force the state governments, right?
Yes, that's very true.
So unilaterally controlled by Xi, everyone is working just to show loyalty to him. So if Xi says loan out money to the private and the local banks, they will do so. In the US, like, if the federal government tries to tell states to do that and they don't want to, they'll fight it in court. It'll be a years-long process. It's just much harder. Yeah.
So now this is all coming to a head at a very interesting time, because Taiwan is having an election on January 13th. And this is a very, very important election for the West, for the future of democracy, and for the future of Taiwan. Taiwan is currently controlled by a pro-Western, pro-democratic party, and they may lose the next election. Now, they are in the lead in all polls that have been taken, and Taiwan bans all polling 2 weeks out from an election because they don't want to. They think polling too close to an election influences results, so they don't do polling before elections. So we'll have to wait and see what happens on January 13th. But if the election doesn't go China's way and the pro-Western Democratic Party wins, I could see China really ramping up its military capacity, which might be the fiscal stimulus that they've kind of been waiting for. We'll see.
Oh, interesting.
I would view that as, classic Theodore Roosevelt. What we need when we were in the panic of the 1890s, I think 1893, during that panic, Theodore Roosevelt comes out. He's like, what we need is a good old-fashioned war. We need a war. And I think China might be at that point where I think they might need a war to do this.
I think you're right, but the risks that the war carries as far as them being cut off from the global system are just enormous.
And we've talked about how China in a lot of ways needs the U.S. more than we need them.
Yeah.
And China needs our consuming power way more than we need their production. That's just the truth.
Yes, that's definitely true. I mean, my immediate issue would be food.
Oh, yeah.
Food and fuel.
Yeah.
Right? Which maybe they're more okay on because of their burgeoning connection with Russia. But I think it would be, I think the price shocks that they would suddenly feel for those things would be enormous.
Two things to watch with China. We got to see how much debt these private companies take off from these banks with the unregulation of the deposit limits. And then we got to check what happens after January 3rd on the Taiwan election. You bet your butt we'll be talking about that one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. And our last current event, we're coming back to the United States, back to home, and we're going to talk about a fight for abortion rights in Texas and its impact on the state. So Texas passed a 6-week abortion ban back in 2021, I believe, or 2022, whenever Roe was overturned, just around there. And what have the effects been? Well, first thing I want to say is infant deaths have risen by 11.5% in Texas over the previous year. Now, this is a spike which has reversed a nearly decade-long decline between 2014 and 2021. And in between this point, infant deaths had fallen by nearly 15%, and now they're back up 11%. They almost lost all their progress in terms of infant mortality. Now, one reason of this is more babies are being born. There's no doubt about that. There are more babies being born. 2022 saw the rate of babies born increase by more than 10,000. These are 10,000 more babies born than would have been expected without the abortion ban. So that's a 3% increase. These are babies that would not, the study estimates that these are babies that would not have been born if the abortion ban was not in effect. Now, this is taking a lot of the medical community by storm. We have Dr. Erica Werner. She is the chair of gynecology at Tufts Medical Center. And she said, we all knew that infant mortality rate would go up because many of these terminations were for pregnancies that don't turn into healthy, normal kids. It's exactly what we are all concerned about. Now, this makes perfect sense. We see a lot of these, if these abortions that were taking place weren't due to medical reasons, we would not see the mortality rate go up at all.
Yeah.
But because the mortality rate's going up, we know that a vast portion of these abortions were done specifically for medical reasons. And now there are women who are suing the state of Texas because of this. And a Travis County judge, one woman testified in front of a Travis County judge that she had to wait for her baby's heart to stop beating so the doctors could finally provide the abortion that she desperately needed. It's just nuts. This one fetus was suffering from a disease that keeps the brain and skull from developing normally, and it basically is certain death upon birth. And the woman had to go through the entire pregnancy and carry it to full term just to be born as a stillborn.
Yeah. It's a shame to me that this is such part of our culture war, because like, if you think if you're pro-life, right, the point is to encourage life, and that's why you think abortion shouldn't be allowed. Well, you're not helping that cause when you're enforcing laws so much that it's risking the mother's life this often, and that it's resulting in this much of an increase in infant mortality.
Yeah. No, I mean, and now the maternal mortality rate is also at risk.
Yeah.
So now this is an example of Amanda Zurowski. She is also one of the plaintiffs in this case. She testified on Wednesday that her water broke 18 weeks into her pregnancy, which made her high risk for a life-threatening infection, and the baby was not likely to survive. But the fetus still had a heartbeat, so the abortion was not allowed to go through.
Yeah.
She only received an emergency abortion when she went into septic shock from infection.
That's crazy.
It took her to get to the brink of death. That's how close it gets. So when we talk about life of the mother, it's like what do you have to prove, like 90% that the woman's going to die?
Yeah.
100% that the woman's going to die? We know that pregnancy is one of the most dangerous things that a human can do.
Yeah.
Period. It's one of the most dangerous things that a person can do. And if you're going to tell me that a woman needs to become 90% positive that she's going to die, or 100% positive that she's going to die in order she can get the medical care that she needs, you've totally have a misunderstanding of healthcare. Completely.
Yeah.
We just have to see if this holds. I think that electing Republicans locally, nationally, is a threat to this issue. I think women who, if you at all are worried about your rights in carrying a child, you cannot, in good faith, vote for this version of the Republican Party. Whether, you might be in New York and you think, oh no, my local Republican congressman is a moderate. Yeah, maybe, but he empowers the congressmen from Tennessee and from Texas and Florida who pass bills like this, who now get to sit on health-related committees in the House of Representatives and then make policy decisions that will affect your life, whether you know it or not.
And your moderate congressman is also probably going to be voting along party lines with these bills.
Of course.
Right? So it's not like you're removing the vote for the legislation that's going to restrict your rights.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just really sad news coming out of Texas, and it's something we just can't forget, that this is what's going on in certain parts of America, and the federal government needs to do more. We need to give the federal government more teeth to do more. We need to bring back the standard of Roe v. Wade. That is what Joe Biden should and will be running on in 2024, and that's what needs to happen. We need a good Senate majority, a retaking of the House, and Biden to stay in office, and Roe v. Wade has a better chance of getting codified into law than any other point in our history, I think.
Definitely, yeah.
All right.
Moving on to our deep dive.
Are you ready?
Let's do this. We should just speak like a whole trailer for each deep dive that we do. In a world
where homelessness is worse than ever and people die.
So our deep dive this week is on a policy called Housing First, which I'm going to just start with defining.
Yeah.
The idea, so after homelessness kind of took its current day form in the 80s, generally there was a policy that focused on treatment first.
Yes.
It was, we're going to treat the vast majority of homeless people who have some kind of underlying condition, usually psychological, whether that's addiction or a different mental health disorder. We're going to provide them with treatment, and then only based on how they progress through that treatment, whether they get better, will we determine whether we will give them housing.
And in many ways, it was holding these people who were struggling to the highest possible standard.
Totally.
I mean, we're talking about no alcohol at all. Everyone drinks every once in a while, man. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. It's like holding to this, or also like people had to stay on their psychiatric care. Yeah. And there are so many people who don't go to therapy that should.
Yes. No, totally.
It's like they were demanding these people to become the perfect citizen before they got long-term housing assistance.
Yes. And I think the question is whether, like, the real value question at the heart here is, does anyone deserve to be homeless?
Right.
Right? Does any amount of doing drugs or drinking or poverty mean that someone should be homeless? And I have a very fundamental, strong stance here that answer is no.
Yeah.
Everyone deserves a home. It is a human right. I think anyone who says otherwise has not found it in themselves yet to empathize with the position of not having a home, of not knowing whether someone's going to tell you that you have to go somewhere else and sleep, of knowing whether your few possessions are going to be stolen or you'll be attacked while you are trying to sleep somewhere else.
Or sexually abused, which is massive in the homeless community.
Exactly. So I think I'll start with the foundation there. And given that, Housing First takes a different route, right? Housing First says we want to give these people permanent, stable housing regardless of their sobriety and what they do in mental health counseling or anything else. This Housing First kind of started to gain traction in the late 90s, early 2000s. There was an organization, I think it's called Housing Pathways. It's something Pathways. I have it on one of my links here. But they started this. It was a nonprofit organization. And instantly they found fantastic results for specifically chronically homeless people. So their Housing First is good for any of the homeless, but chronically homeless people who are homeless for long stretches of time versus transient homeless people, which sometimes have like a one-time shelter stay, or episodic homeless people, which means they have repeated or brief stays at shelters. They are the ones who not only need housing the most of the time, but also who are the biggest drain on resources to support those in need if they don't have housing. And I'll get into that later. But there was a meta-analysis of 4 randomized control studies. I want to talk about this to talk about how Housing First is so much better, so much more effective at solving homelessness, at keeping people housed than the Treatment First model. This meta-analysis found that housing the homeless people, the patients or the subjects who were placed in the Housing First part of the trial experienced a housing retention rate of 80%, which means 80% of the days that they ran this study, or for the days they ran this study, the people in this portion, in the Housing First portion, were stably housed for 80% of those days. In the Treatment as Usual group, those people were housed for only 30% of the days.
Wow.
That is a massive, massive difference. And basically every study that has looked at Housing First versus Treatment First finds these effects, finds that the argument used to be that people are not housing ready, that you have to get them housing ready with treatment to be able to keep them stably housed. That's not the case, and that never was the case. I will say, very important thing to note here, Housing First, this randomized control studies have shown Housing First does not really have any significant difference in effect from Treatment First models for other problems. It doesn't help more than Treatment First with sobriety or psychological issues. So I don't want to say this is a catch-all. When you give people housing, you still need to give them the other assistance that they need. But I do buy into the argument that once people are housed, they can actually focus on some of these other issues better, rather than just, where do I sleep tonight? What am I going to get to eat?
Yes. And I think it's very effective, I believe, at preventing mental health struggles. Because so many things happen to you while you're homeless, whether it be PTSD, whether it be suicide attempts for being homeless, whether it be being in fight or flight mode every hour of every day.
Yeah.
Like that's what causes schizophrenia. That's a direct cause of schizophrenia. And so it's a preventative measure as well to those people who were chronically homeless, to try to catch them before they develop mental illnesses from being homeless.
Totally. I think, we'll stick with that. I want to talk about 2 examples of where Housing First has been implemented. So one was in Utah, where in 2005, Utah implemented Housing First policy, and their plan was a 10-year plan to end homelessness in the state. So by 2015, they wanted to completely wipe it out, and they were going to do it with Housing First.
Good job, Utah.
In effect, it reduced chronic homelessness by 71% over that period. Not 100, but still
very impressive.
Huge strides, right?
Massive.
That is big.
Impressive.
The important thing here, and I mentioned about the resources earlier, what they found in addition to combating homelessness is it was so much less expensive to house the homeless than it was to treat them with the normal methods, which the normal methods are often giving really expensive tents to people in homeless encampments. It's treating them at the emergency room constantly because they have these severe health conditions that need treatment all the time. It's police that's needed to move them around because they're never allowed to stay where they want to stay.
Yeah.
According to the director of the Utah program, the average chronically homeless person costs Salt Lake City more than $20,000 a year. It costs only $8,000 to put someone into permanent housing.
Doesn't that makes me so unbelievably mad? It does. It makes me really mad.
It's crazy.
Because it makes it so obvious that homelessness is a choice we're making.
Yeah.
You know? It's like we talk about how poverty is a lot of the times a choice.
Yeah.
How we had the expanded child tax credit and how we reduced poverty by 30-something%. And then we, let it expire and poverty shot right back up. It's a choice we're making, guys.
Yes.
And we're all just sitting on our asses choosing to have our fellow humans sleep on the street.
Yep.
And it makes me sick.
It's terrible. And it to me, it speaks to a lack of guts for policymakers
Yes.
to pay up front so that you can solve these problems and reap the benefits as time goes on, right? I cannot think of a better reason to take on debt than a program like this.
Can't think of a better reason.
Right? It's perfect.
Because it has a return. It has a
Exactly.
return. Right.
Yeah.
It has a return because you're spending less money on all the other things.
Totally,
Yes.
totally. So the one other thing I want to say, Utah looked at this program as a decade-long program, which means it ended in 2015.
Oh.
And since then, the homeless population has continued to increase, which means Utah has regressed. And so why did this happen? It's because the resources were allocated for that point in time. But the truth is, this is an issue that needs continuous attention, right? I looked vaguely into like causes of homelessness, and cost of rent is like the biggest correlation with homelessness rates in any given place, right? That just means people start to live in their cars and then to live on the street eventually when they can't pay the rent because it's gotten too high. That means that because you don't know how rents are going to increase, how the economy is going to fluctuate, you need to constantly have resources allocated to be able to grant people housing so that they don't go homeless.
Yes.
The other example I wanted to talk about was California, because there's a difference, or there's a nuance here that I think is important to address. So Gavin Newsom, who's now the governor, was the mayor of San Francisco in 2004, and he introduced a similar program to Utah's. He aimed to build 3,000 permanent housing units for the homeless for the next decade. If you know anything about the state of homelessness in the U.S. now, you know that San Francisco is the hub for homelessness, and California in general, of course. So Newsom actually hit his target of the 3,000 permanent housing units, but it didn't account for an influx of new homeless people, which California had in droves throughout this period. So because of that, the plan towards permanent housing, there were still limited resources, right? So some of those resources came out of making temporary shelters for people. Now, when we talk about housing first, we're kind of saying we want to put people in permanent housing instead of temporary shelters. But when you have people going homeless, like in the immediate term, you still need those temporary shelters to take care of people. And in the immediate term, it allowed unsheltered homelessness to rise. So,
wait, unsheltered homelessness to decline, you mean?
No, because they didn't have the temporary shelters.
Oh, unsheltered homelessness rose because they didn't have the temporary shelter.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. And the 3,000 units weren't enough.
Got it.
Then we take a look at Los Angeles, which also tried to pursue a housing first program. Now, their problem was that they couldn't hit the target number of new permanent units because of California's zoning and permitting laws.
Classic.
Yes, which are generally the cause of our housing shortage. And the Stanford Institute for Economic and Policy Research said in places with a housing shortage like coastal California, there's a long wait before permanent housing becomes available, which defies the original vision of Housing First to immediately provide an apartment. The high capital costs to develop permanent supportive housing in some localities can prohibit Housing First as a viable option. So that seems to be saying zoning and permitting have to be addressed first. They are a bottleneck to being able to make Housing First a policy that works.
Honestly, that is like zoning reform is the biggest problem in the country, period. I mean, it stops us from fighting climate change. It stops us from building houses for the homeless.
Yes.
It stops us from building housing, period.
Yeah, I would legitimately make a plea, and it's like a little bit of work to be a member of your local government, but anyone who's listening to this, that local government is where these battles are won. Sometimes in California, and in Massachusetts, we just had a law passed. There are state laws that get passed that kind of they preempt local governments as far as what they're allowed to zone for. But generally, these are local battles that are happening across the country to allow for denser housing for more people. And if you are interested in this at all, if you, like us, think that this is an issue that's kind of causing so many other issues, and you want to get involved in your local government, you would be a huge help.
And you should email us.
Totally.
And you should email us.
Yes.
Our email is everythingsucks.let'sfixit@gmail.com.
Yeah.
That's it. Email us. I ran for local office. I am 24 years old and I am in local government, and I just voted to upzone a portion of our town so that we can build more housing.
Yeah.
If you have that same desire, you should contact and email us. We'll talk with you.
We'll help.
We'll help.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, good. That's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
I want to talk about how the Biden administration is handling our homelessness problem. So in 2021, the Housing and Urban Development team, it launched the program House America, and they were planning on trying to cut the homeless population in half by January 2025. That was their goal. Well, none of that happened.
No.
We just saw an 11.5% increase. What did we see? A 12% increase in homelessness in 2023. So we didn't see that, unfortunately, but they are saying a lot of the right things. They are looking at, and they're saying a lot of the right things. They want to change regulatory flexibility for federal housing programs, which this is good. This is kind of what we're talking about when we talk about treatment second. Identify access to identification, medical, and benefit documentation needed to determine eligibility. That's at least in the right track, because it's getting it more transparent on getting you into the house.
Yes.
Right?
Definitely.
Strengthening collaboration between federal, state, and local agencies. This is super important. For too long, the federal government has really been outside of the fight of public and affordable housing. They haven't really been as active as they should be. And the Biden administration is at least saying that they want to be an ally in that fight.
Yeah.
They talk also about a housing supply action plan, and this is really good stuff. This I like. They want to reward jurisdictions that do zoning reform and change their land use policies.
I think they have already implemented that.
Yes, they've implemented this one.
Yeah.
So the federal government gives local governments money when they change their zoning laws so that more housing can get built.
Yeah.
Which is really, really good. And then they want to ensure that more government-owned supply of homes and other housing units never get bought up by private investors, which is also a really good step.
Yes.
That needs to go further. We need to make sure that houses can't be bought, single-family houses can't be bought by large investors. Yeah. That needs to stop. Investment funds and banks, whatever, I'm not going to say that too much, but investment funds definitely need to be barred from purchasing single-family housing.
Yeah.
That's unacceptable. So... yeah, from my view, though, I just don't think that Joe Biden and the Democrats really did enough when they had control of the House and Senate. I don't think they did enough to do homelessness.
I agree.
They didn't tackle it.
It just needs it needs a lot of money.
It needs a lot of money. And you know what's sad? Homeless people do not have any political power.
No.
And because they have no political power, there's no political interest to fight for them. Yeah. Because the truth is that they can't really vote. How do you vote without an address? How hard is it to vote without an address? I'll tell you, it's very hard to vote without an address.
Yeah.
There is no political benefit in fighting the homeless because they're not a constituency that's going to vote either way.
I agree. But on the other hand, we do know that rents are closely correlated with homelessness.
That's true.
And I think high rents do cause homelessness a lot of the time.
Yeah, if you're going to tackle high rents and you're going to do zoning reform, I definitely think that that's a good way to go about it.
That's going to attack homelessness, and there is a massive constituency that does care about those things enormously.
Yeah, and I think maybe we could even look at that 12% increase in homelessness and have the analysis that, look, we just went through a big inflationary spiral where the cost of rent went up 10% over the year.
Yeah.
Maybe it was always natural that was going to lead to a spike in homelessness, right? Maybe that's not a failure of the policy. Maybe that's indicative of the macroeconomic trend, but the fact that those 12% of people are still homeless and then weren't immediately assisted with getting back on their feet is the problem.
Well, I think it's the combination of super high rents and the ending of subsidies from the American Rescue Plan.
That's definitely right. We saw massive reductions in homelessness from the American Rescue Plan. Again, we've talked about this too. We did a whole deep dive on this. The American Rescue Plan basically built out a new American social safety net.
Yes.
It did a lot of rental assistance. It did a lot of housing assistance. It did the child tax credit, which was basically a child allowance. It expanded Obamacare subsidies for health insurance. It did a lot.
Yeah.
It did a lot. And we just kind of let it all go away. Subsidies for childcare too, which are going away.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be a reaction, and our economy is going to have to remold to this post-American Rescue Plan money world.
Totally.
Which is so sad because, again, it's all choices, man.
Yeah, it is all choices. And I think we've talked about this a little bit off camera, and I think we'll hopefully find a way to kind of pigeonhole it into another deep dive at some point. But what we really need to combat not only homelessness, but also to lower rents and housing prices for everyone is basically a public option for housing, and one that is constantly building up stock, that is constantly expanding, so that these prices can't just run away like crazy. Because when you have a basic need where the supply is far outstripped by demand, massively inflated prices are the only outcome that you can get. And the only way to hold those down is an expanding government supply. That
exists outside of the market and charges based off cost and
income.
Lower rents and income. Yes.
Charges based off income, because that way you don't have to worry about a homeless, unemployed person. But we'll probably get into how that will look at a later date.
So yeah. All right, guys, homelessness sucks. If you have any inclination to fight for it or a better future or to be involved in your local government, email us. Everything sucks. Let's fix it at gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.